At 6:32 a.m., an email from Multnomah County Recording landed in my inbox with a subject line so dry it felt harmless: "E-recording confirmation document accepted." The body named my bungalow on SE Tacoma Street, referenced a quitclaim deed, and thanked the submitter for using the portal. The PDF attached showed my full legal name as the grantor and a trustee I had never heard of as the grantee. The signature block bore my own signature angled loop on the K, straight slash on the T, except I had not signed anything. Our house sits 3 blocks from the river in Sellwood moorland, with a porch just wide enough for 2 chairs and a little table that leans left when the weather turns. Inside, the rooms stack straight, shotgun style, with soft pine floors I sanded myself and never quite leveled. I run a small salvage and restore business out of the garage, the kind of work that makes your hands look older than your face: heritage windows, century-old sash cords, door slabs that need coaxing to hang true. When orders are slow, I list vintage hardware on an Etsy shop I call Heartwood Reprise. You can live off patience and linseed oil if you don't mind counting receipts, and I don't. My husband, Sam, is a respiratory therapist at OHSU up on Marquam Hill. He works nights more often than not, trading shifts on an app called UKD that looks like a calendar someone chewed on. He swears nights suit him. He says the hospital breathes different at 3 a.m., monitors like metronomes, nurses braid it into teams that make chaos look choreographed, the city below a quilt of sodium lights. He likes the hush the hospitals insist upon even when everything is loud. He always liked systems that let him disappear in purpose. We got married on a drizzly March afternoon under the jinko in our backyard. A friend baked a cake with lemon curd that cracked in the middle. We ate it anyway and pretended the fault line was a river reflected in frosting. A year later we tried to have a baby in the ordinary way, then with calendars, then with the resigned humor of people who are too tired to count. A urologist off SE 39th printed out numbers that looked like a ruler with the first inch shaved off. He used words like low and unlikely and not impossible the way a patient contractor tells you a crumbling sill can be stabilized. We nodded as if knowing made any of it easier. Cash flow has been a low-grade headache for years. The furnace died the first week of January. The emergency install came with a 12-month promo loan that turns claws out on day 366. My van, a spry-looking transit that hides an old soul, developed a shift that felt like a yawn on the Sellwood Bridge. The mechanic on SE 17th called it a transmission's way of asking for respect and a rebuild. OHSU health insurance covered most of a minor ER visit when Sam fainted after skipping dinner between back-to-back code blues, but most leaves room for bills that arrive in plain envelopes and ruin mornings. We weren't drowning. We were treading water and telling ourselves that treading is exercise if you don't stop. When I opened the county PDF, the notary stamp made my stomach tilt. It was clean, crisp, with a name that matched a UPS store on Milwaukee Avenue where we sometimes shipped awkward packages. The date was 2 nights ago at 2:09 a.m. The signature, the fake me sat over a line that read grantor. The grantee was a trust with a name that sounded like someone named their house and a trustee address at that same UPS store. The recorder's stamp gave it the county's blessing like a priest over a wedding of strangers. Sam was supposed to be asleep after a 12-hour overnight. The house made soft noises all old houses do, settling, sighing, a refrigerator clearing its throat. I stood in the kitchen and read the PDF again while the kettle decided what kind of morning it wanted. Adrenaline does a very specific thing to my hearing. It turns the world into a soundboard where only certain sliders are up. I heard the Ring doorbell chime from 2 days before at 4:51 a.m. with the gentle, too cheerful tone it uses no matter what it captures. I remembered that I hadn't saved the clip. I made a list on the back of an invoice because paper makes order, even when bodies won't. Item 1, bank. Item 2, recorder's office. Item 3, notary. Item 4, UKG timestamps. Item 5, ring micro SD. I poured tea into a chipped mug that has survived 3 houses and 2 near drops and tastes like endurance. Then I did what a man in a kitchen with an illegal deed in his inbox does. I called the bank and asked for a fraud specialist. On Point Credit Union has a branch on SC Woodstock where the tellers know me because I bring them coffee after big jobs and because I applied for a small business line when I thought I wanted to be the kind of shop with a sign. The woman on the fraud line gave me her name and the voice. People who deal with panic all day adopt a tone that tells you she will not catch what you've got. I told her a deed recorded against my house with my signature. She froze our joint HELOC and put a note on the account requiring in-person, password-authenticated changes. She gave me a case number OPFR-77466 and told me to file a police report even if it felt like tattle. I opened a separate checking in my business name and scheduled payments to come in there. Boundaries look like numbers before they look like anything else. The county recording office sits in a tired building downtown where carpet, municipal lighting, and the slow persistence of paper make their own weather. The clerk behind the glass looked through the thick binder of that day's deeds like she'd done it 1,000 times. She printed me a copy with a barcode at the bottom and stamped it received even though I had received it more thoroughly than any stamp could convey. Her eyebrows flickered when I told her the signature wasn't mine. She gave me a form to request a fraud flag and suggested I bring a letter from a lawyer if the flag needed teeth. She had the practiced, neutral face of someone who watches people realize their lives have parallel versions. I drove to the UPS store on Milwaukee. The owner recognized Sam's name when I asked whether a notary with that stamp worked there. He said she did afternoons, nice lady, professional, doesn't cut corners. He glanced at a log behind the counter and told me she had executed a notarization Thursday at 2 p.m. He frowned at the deed copy I slid across the counter. He told me notaries trained here do not notarize outside business hours and certainly not at 9 a.m. The stamp looked like hers, but the time didn't. By noon I had learned the first rule of a life that's about to split. Everything looks legitimate until you read the timestamp like it matters. I drove home past the New Seasons on Woodstock with its 2 expensive strawberries and the felt-tipped sign that says thanks, neighbors like a plea. I pulled the Ring micro SD and played recent clips. The camera had caught a familiar figure at 1:47 a.m. 2 nights before, slipping down our steps with a manila envelope tucked against his chest like a baby you're pretending to be casual about. The same figure returned at 3:13 a.m. empty-handed. The headlights of a car I didn't recognize washed the porch for an instant, then left a black rectangle of night like I could step through it to something where my name belonged to me. Sam had a Sunday sleep-in on the calendar, but the UKG app showed he had swapped a block last minute, giving a 7 p.m. 7 a.m. to a coworker named Tara and picking up a 3 p.m. 3 a.m. on Thursday. The swap posted at 1:22 a.m. Thursday, which is a time that feels like it belongs only to short-order cooks and people in trouble. I could feel the part of my brain that loves tight miters and scribed joints start lining PDFs in neat stacks in my head. I told myself I didn't know anything yet. I told myself a story in which a hacker lifted my signature from a filing and spoofed a notary stamp and snuck into my porch to take something from my desk because I'd left the window unlocked. That story required a confluence of audacity and coincidence that would have made me laugh last week and that today made me nauseous. So I did the next obvious thing, I went hunting for a storage unit. The city's storage places keep predictable hours and more predictable smells, cardboard, dust, a lemon cleaner that tries and fails to make you think nothing lives there. Willamette Storage on SE 17th had a front room with an orchid fighting for dignity and a woman with a permanent marker behind the desk. Unit 23B was rented under my name with a card ending in digits I didn't recognize, and an auto draft I had not noticed because the amount hides easily among monthly things you tell yourself you'll audit soon. The ledger said it had been opened 11 months ago. I held the key on its blue tag and felt like a character in a dumb play I would have rolled my eyes at. 23B smelled like baby powder and bleach. The concrete floor held no dust around the threshold, like someone cared enough to sweep. A rack of cheap shelves lined the right wall. On the top shelf, diapers laid by size from 4 to 6. On the second, formula sample cans and a brand of wipes we had never bought filled a plastic bin. On the third, a box labeled bath in a tidy block hand held baby soap and tiny washcloths rolled like pastries. A collapsible stroller leaned against the left wall. A clear bin at the back contained paper clinic forms from a pediatric office in Sellwood, an enrollment packet for a Montessori on SE Stark, a parent portal login for something called Tadpoles with my email as father of record, a waiver for a gym playroom signed in a flare pen that looked like Sam's dotting and not mine. I sat on the concrete and pressed my palm into the floor until a small tattoo of grit formed in my skin. I took photos of every sheet of paper with the care I give a complicated hinge, steady, square to the surface, light, even. There was a manila envelope taped inside the box with 2 SIM cards and a sticker with a phone number handwritten in Chicago-style numerals and the words Kid Pics. There were copies of insurance cards, Oregon Health Plan listing a child with Sam's last name hyphenated with someone else's. The hyphen made me want to lie down. On the way home, I stopped at a Safeway where the receipts come with that pale green stripe and the fluorescent lights make you feel like your skin is the wrong size. The self-checkout attendant looked like she had seen every version of sadness and every trick to steal lunch meat. I bought milk because it felt like a thing a person might do on the day his house was partially given away by a PDF. When I reached the radishes, I realized I had never liked radishes. The overhead music played a neutral pop song that made my teeth feel loose. In the garage, I made a second list and stacked it next to the first. The lists looked like a person making inventory after a fire. When Sam woke in the early afternoon and shuffled into the kitchen, I set the county printout on the table and put beside it the photo of him leaving at 1:47 a.m. with the envelope and the Willamette storage contract. I kept my voice in the lane of a man explaining a finish schedule to a client who thinks polyurethane dries in 10 minutes. He said systems mix names more often than we think and asked if I had considered the possibility that my own paranoia was creating patterns where there weren't any. He said helping a friend sometimes involves a name on a form because we live in a country that likes boxes checked. He said I was always happiest when I had a list to clean. I told him I had frozen the joint HELOC and opened a separate checking account for incoming business receipts. He told me my distrust hurt his ability to feel like my partner. Those sentences did not share a room. They looked at each other through a window. The first independent witness walked into my day the way witnesses do by accident. Our neighbor on the next block is a retired letter carrier named Bart who still does loops with a tote bag for exercise and chat. He knocked on my garage door to ask if I could help him plane a sticky storm door. He admired a vintage mortise lock on my bench, the way men past 70 admire hardware like other people admire grandchildren. When I told him I could do the door next week because my house had just been quitclaimed out from under me, He laughed in the way of people who assume hyperbole and then stopped laughing when I didn't. Then he told me, and he did it so simply it burned, that he had seen Sam on Thursday morning put a child in the back seat of our Corolla while holding a blue sippy cup in his teeth like a pen. He had lifted the child with the ease of someone who did it often and clicked the buckle with muscle memory. He said he had waved and received a distracted wave back. He said the cup had a silicone straw and a little mountain pattern. He noticed because his granddaughter had the same. He told me this like a man who means well. I felt my breath go flat and wide like a lake before a storm. I called a lawyer because there is a point at which emails and counters don't grant enough gravity. Her office sat on as W6th with a view onto trees pretending to be a forest and the MAX rolling I like a toy. She wrote notes with a fountain pen and asked precise questions that made me feel seen and also indicted. She recommended a two-part plan: immediately send a letter to the county requesting a fraud flag and reversal, send a cease and desist to the trustee address listed at the UPS store, file a police report on the forged deed, notify our bank in writing that no new debt, liens, or HELOC draws would be authorized by me without in-person, password authenticated consent. She suggested a second letter to Sam: a boundary on paper freeze joint cards, move deposits, require written inventory of any accounts my name was used on, and schedule a DNA test at a lab on Powell for any child he claimed or suggested might be mine. She handed me a copy of a template with lines for dates. She gave my matter a number that made it feel real: STLW-20 2031. I delivered the letter to my own table at dinner time and watched the way paper can alter the temperature of a room. He told me I was punishing him for an act of kindness. He said he had put my name on things because systems asked for it and because he had promised to be the sort of man who said yes when needed. He implied I was the kind of woman who preferred paper to compassion. He told me his coworker's situation involved a man who tracked her phone and a baby whose formula ran out in apartments that smelled like old towels. He made me into a villain because it helps when you have turned your life into a rescue mission without asking the person you share a house with. Somewhere between pity and anger is a place that feels like betrayal wearing a borrowed coat. By then the drumbeat had started. On Point called to confirm that a request had come through DocuSign to draw on the HELOC for $30,000 for immediate medical expenses assigned by my username at 2:54 a.m., flagged by metadata that showed an IP address not ours and a device that wasn't one of our Macs. The DocuSign time matched the ring clip time plus 90 minutes. The bank froze everything with a case note so heavy I could hear the paper thud. They told me to notate in case of a later fight because fraud loves patience more than it loves risk. I wrote OPFR-77,466 3 times in different colors and taped it to the inside of my cabinet like a recipe. The next day, a bill from Providence Medical Group arrived addressed to me as guarantor for pediatric services rendered to a patient with the last name hyphenated with Sam's. The date of service matched one of his swap nights. The CPT codes listed an ear infection visit and a vaccine. The clinic put my email on the portal for parent access. I stared at the envelope until the ink grew fuzzy. I thought about calling the clinic to explain, then wondered how to explain this and not sound like a man who knows how to make words into weapons. I called anyway. The receptionist asked for my birth date and sighed in solidarity when I told her I had been attached to a chart I wasn't part of. She took me off the portal and reminded me that if I called again, I should have the MRN ready. I wrote down the MRN and folded the paper in half twice. We had a public scene at my father-in-law's retirement party because life loves irony and because public scenes like rooms with lots of chairs. He ran a heating company in Beaverton for 37 years. The scroll banner with his photo on it made me want to cry and be kind. I brought my folder. I waited until after cake. I explained to a room full of people with Sam's jawline that our house had been quitclaimed by a forged document, that I had retrieved a video clip and taken it to the recorder, that On Point had caught a DocuSign attempt to draw on our HELOC in the middle of the night, that Willamette Storage had my name on 23B with diapers lined up like soldiers, that a pediatric bill had arrived with me as guarantor for a child I had never met, that a neighbor had seen Sam put a toddler into the Corolla. I did not use adjectives. I let nouns do all the work. People shifted in their folding chairs. Someone dropped a plastic fork. My mother-in-law refilled my water glass with steady hands that told history. A cousin rolled his eyes at what he termed big city drama. My father-in-law said in the voice of a man who has soothed boilers and toddlers that this sounded like a misunderstanding until proven otherwise. People like to use words like misunderstanding when a family member needs cover. Sam cornered me later near the coat rack with an expression of wounded principle. He said I had turned him into someone he wasn't because I could not tolerate a gray zone. He said I had made an audience of the people he loved. He accused me of humiliating him when he had been trying to do right by a coworker and her baby. I told him in the tone I use with clients who want me to patch rot with putty that I would not live in a house where my name could be moved around like a tool. I told him a child's needs did not require forged quitclaim deeds. I told him I needed him to show up at the lab on Powell on Tuesday or write a line in ink he would not cross that said I was not a father to any child. I told him I had frozen the joint visa and moved autopays to my separate account. He told me I was choosing money over people. It is always easier to pretend those are different categories than admit they are two pockets of the same coat. The toddler appeared in my day 2 days later when I least deserved to see him. I was in line at New Seasons at Woodstock, buying the groceries I could bring myself to buy: bread, butter, coffee beans on sale. Ahead of me, a woman with a face I recognized without knowing why tried to keep a child from licking the credit card terminal. The kid had dark hair and eyes the color of wet bark, a blue sippy with a silicone straw and a mountain print, and a fox-eared hat with a tassel he chewed absent-mindedly. He dropped a palm on the floor and looked at it like a tragedy. The woman spoke softly and scooped up both child and palm. She wore a work badge clipped to a tote bag that listed OHSU billing in small type. A second later, Sam walked in from the Starbucks kiosk with the tray, the half-skip a tired person does when they carry very hot drinks. The woman looked at him with relief. The child stretched for the cup holder like a person who knows routines still matter. I looked away because looking more would have made me write a future in big letters where all of us are villains. I paid for coffee and drove home, and sat in my driveway with the car in park and hands on 10 and 2. The ring chime sounded from the porch with its fake cheer. A package sat itself down like a cat. I couldn't make myself open it immediately. I walked to the garage and touched a door I was stripping for a client on SC Rex Street. The old paint lifted in curls that fell like fingernails onto brown paper. I worked until my forearms ached and then some, because hurt I choose is always easier than the kind that picks me. That night my heart made a rhythm I didn't like. It sputtered, caught, and went too fast in a way that made my fingers tingle. The next day my doctor at a clinic near Bybee put a stethoscope to my chest and listened in the way people trained to operate under fluorescent lights do. She told me I had likely PBCs, benign but annoying, worsened by stress, better with whatever we refused to let in. She gave me a Holter monitor and told me to wear it for 2 days. I wore the device into the garage and tried to stand without hunching. The leads itched. The adhesive smelled like ointment and plastic. My body felt like a radio tuned slightly off. The next three twists came on paper thin enough to tear with a breath. The first was an RBC letter confirming setup of a registered education savings plan under my SIN on behalf of the beneficiary and requiring my signature in blue ink. The second was a Canada Post notification that a flex delivery assignment had been changed from my profile to a PO box downtown, with pickup authorized for a secondary user listed by a last name that matched the OHSU badge tote at New Seasons. The third was a My Chart email pinging me as an authorized proxy for pediatric records at Providence. Someone had added my email to a child's chart. I called RBC and triggered their fraud cadence. I said the rest was not mine. The calm voice on the line set a flag and gave me a case number RBC ED-11,877. I called Canada Post, who told me to log in and remove secondary users and to come in person with ID if I wanted the changes to stick. I did. The counter clerk scratched out the secondary user with a pen like she was killing a fly. I called Providence and spun in a queue that played hold music that made me consider moving to a forest with no phones. The coordinator removed me with 3 clicks and skydiver calm. I sent Sam another letter. I listed the actions I had taken, frozen joint cards, opened separate accounts, placed a credit freeze at Equifax and TransUnion, revoked proxies, filed P.O. box changes, requested logs from the Lake Oswego UPS notary, scheduled DNA appointments on Powell for Tuesday and Saturday next. I reminded him of the on-point case number, the county recorder form, the RBC case, the Canada Post receipt. I included a paragraph that said, plainly, that if he placed my name on any form regarding a child, I would assume bad faith unless I saw a court order. I wrote that the child's needs should be met by adults who told the truth on paper. I wrote that I was ready to stand in a courtroom and say both those lines. He didn't show up for the first appointment. He sent a text that read like a press release for a man who has convinced himself he is compassionate, that he wouldn't subject a coworker's baby to a test to make me feel calm. He said the baby wasn't mine. He said testing wasn't necessary. He used the word cruel. The lab tech stamped my paper, noted refusal, and asked if I wanted to hold the appointment fee as a credit. I shook my head. I slid the stamp into my folder and wondered when my life had become lines that made clerks look down. Our mail carrier differed from Bart, the retired one. This one, young and tired and exact, acted as my uninvited second witness later that week. He knocked, handed me a registered letter, and asked to see my ID. The envelope contained a notice from the county that my fraud flag had been acknowledged and the deed recorded in error noted as under review pending a sworn affidavit. The notary at the UPS store had written back to my lawyer asserting she had not stamped any document after 6 p.m. that week. The deed I had received bore her stamp, but no log number in her record. The letter told me to bring myself to the county in person to swear, which I did, standing between 2 men in neon vests who had property line questions and one woman holding a stack of divorce documents with a face that made my chest hurt. I filed a police report with the Bureau because a forged deed is not a misunderstanding, it's a felony. The officer behind the plexiglass recited the line about tight resources and slow processes, but he put my report number where it needed to go. PPDFR-93,321. He told me to keep every piece of paper because outcomes often belong to the person with the neatest box. I told him he had just described my entire personality. The pushback arrived as social pressure dressed in love. Sam's mother left a voicemail that began with the sentence every woman with a son learns to lob like a lifeline. "Surely we can fix this privately," she said. A friend from the neighborhood texted that she had always thought I liked paper more than people. A couple from our church in Westmoreland offered to bring dinner and prayers, and asked whether I had considered a softer heart toward a child who needed names on forms. My own sister in Tacoma asked whether I wanted to be the story one day that a grown man tells about a woman who took his father's name off his school file because she was angry. She has 3 kids. I respect her knives. I told her I didn't want to be any man's story. I wanted to be my own. I moved out a month after the fake deed arrived. A friend of a friend had a 1-bedroom above a florist on SC Hawthorne that smelled like soil in a way that made grief less aggressive. I packed what I could into plastic bins because cardboard felt too doomed. I left the heavy things, including the mid-century couch we spent 3 weeks stalking on Marketplace and the oak table with the burn mark from a candle we pretended to be adults with. I took my tools, my kettle, my notebook with case numbers on the first page. The florist downstairs ran a small aquarium for the cut blooms, and its pump hummed through my floorboards at night like a quiet machine reminding me I was alive. Sam texted a long apology that read like a confession and also like a press release. He said he had meant to help someone who needed a safe name. He said he had not wanted to bother me at the end of long days with decisions that would make me feel small. He said he had used my name because it got the door open and because he assumed I'd say no. He said the child was not his. He said the deed would be reversed because it was a misunderstanding, a notary error, a glitch, anything but what it looked like. He said more that I didn't reply to. The florist's pump hummed. If I'm honest, there are mornings when I open the tadpoles app because a parent invitation arrived in my spam before I blocked everything and I never deleted the icon. The Bluebirds room posts photos of tiny hands painting with sponges, paper smocks tied crooked, faces blurred to anonymity, but eyes still present through pixel fog. Sometimes there's a blue sippy with mountains at the edge of the frame, and I close the app with more force than phones deserve. Would you call DHS and pull a thread you cannot predict because a blue sippy in a photo made your name itch on paper? Or would you believe that the adults have it in hand and go to work and sand a sill until your hands stopped shaking? The county reversed the deed 4 weeks later. The notary's letter and my affidavit and the police report made the paper as heavy as it needed to be. The recording office sent a PDF with a stamp that looked like Salvation if Salvation wore municipal font. I pinned it to my corkboard like a hunting trophy, only I wanted to see. On points, fraud flag stayed put. RBC closed the RESP for cause and sent a letter with a tone that made me feel like I had misbehaved at high school. Canada Post reset my flex delivery. The pediatric clinic removed me from proxy. The DNA appointments expired. The lab archived my samples. I put the final copy of the reversal in my folder and closed it with both hands like a man lowering a lid on a crate. I don't have a clean ending for you because lives rarely applaud the way we want. Sam sent weeks later a photo of a small boy in rain boots stomping a puddle, his face cropped out, his posture a poem. He didn't caption it. He didn't need to. I stared a long time and then slid my phone into a bowl and walked upstairs to the tiny deck that looks out over Hawthorne and makes sounds out of strangers' conversations. People laugh a lot louder when you do not know their last names. I changed passwords, learned to live with 2-factor as a reflex, and kept my credit freeze pins on a card in my wallet I check like a rosary. I stopped wearing the wedding band because it made my finger itch in the grocery store checkout line. I kept my head down and my router updated and my receipts in a plastic box. I tried not to turn into a man who thinks writing case numbers on a legal pad counts as a personality. I failed sometimes and reminded myself to breathe. Sundays, if I'm in town, I walk down to Sellwood Riverfront Park and drink my coffee on a bench by the boat ramp. The same meter attendant steps along the parking lot and tucks bright orange envelopes under wipers, the way careful people tuck kids into cribs. The envelopes flash in the morning like little crimes. Owners come later and pull the slips off with 2 fingers like you hold a bad fact. I watch them decide whether to crumble the paper or fold it and put it somewhere they promise they'll look at later. Sometimes a person will read the ticket and nod like they had been expecting it. That nod is the closest I have to a metaphor for what this year has been. If you asked me what I would have done differently, I would tell you what I told my doctor when she asked how the halter looked. I would have loved softer and checked harder. I would have asked to see logs when I smelled baby powder on a hoodie. I would have told myself that kindness and paperwork are both languages adults have to be fluent in. I would have insisted that if he wanted to be useful to a child, he had to be brave enough to tell me first. If you asked me whether to demand a test to spare a child a future built on a story I can't live with, I would ask you back whether you want that child to grow up learning that the price of safety is someone else's name. There's a final image here if I let myself be sentimental. It is not our porch or the ring clip or even the storage unit with its diaper wall. It is the county recorder's counter where a clerk stamps documents all day and all the stamps sound the same: birth certificates and property reversals, divorces and name changes, liens and releases. The stamp makes a soft, bureaucratic thud that carries 10 feet and stops. I heard that sound when she stamped my reversal. The same sound someone else heard when their child's birth certificate got its first mark. The same sound the policeman's report made when he signed mine and set it in a tray. If you listen, cities speak in those small thuds, recorded lives adjusted. The morning the reversal came through, I walked back up S.C. Madison with the paper in my bag and stopped at the bridge to watch a heron lift slow off a sandbar like it didn't know gravity was a law. The sound in my ears was still the clerk's stamp, steady and human-made, but the bird lifted regardless, and I stood there with both facts, not trying to reconcile them, paper deciding a life in one hand, something winged ignoring paper in the other.